Don't be feeling blue, no, no. Shine your light all around, like I know you can do, baby. Yeah, I know you can do. Now some people call me. Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Returning to the show tonight is Michael Joseph. Michael will take us through the occult and esoteric symbolism embedded within the world of cryptocurrency. And so without further ado, here's Michael. Well, friends, we have another great show tonight. Michael Joseph is back with us, and Michael has done some amazing work over the years. Today, we're going to talk about blockchain and cryptocurrency and occult symbolism and magic. Michael, I tell you this all the time. You've done an amazing job with your work. The research is very deep, and I have learned a lot from your material. So hats off to all the work you've done. I know a lot of people are really appreciative of it. I get a lot of emails from folks saying that your work just blows their mind. This is how the controllers or the ruling elite, this is how they roll. This is what they do. So if you really want to understand their agenda, then you have to understand their signs and symbols.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me back. It's been a while. And, I just, looking into stuff, putting it out there. These are all questions that I've had and it made me look into these things further. And I'm just sharing what I found in case people have similar questions that I've had. So it's kind of as simple as that from my end.
So you have your first slide up. Did you want to start taking us through this?
Yeah, sure. So what really prompted me to look at this was your conversation with Sophia Smallstorm about this. Because, with all of the crypto and blockchain stuff, it's kind of hard to avoid hearing about that, in the alternative media world now. And so, I kind of was peripherally absorbing information here and there. And then when you guys were talking about it, kind of pointing out some of the dangers perhaps that might be, involved, and then having a lot of the truther world kind of really waving the flag for crypto and blockchain.
Yep.
I just thought, hey, let me look in and see if I can, do what I usually do and just see if there's any esoteric information that I think I might be able to decode and, compare to literature and some of the symbols and, the occult sigils and magic that I've looked at. And I definitely think I found a lot of stuff. And the first thing I think is actually really obvious. If you just define cryptocurrency, crypto, the definition is secret, hidden, or concealed. And then you think about some of the etymology like crypt, death, abyss, things of that nature. And then you combine currency. And if you assign currency to an esoteric function, it would be the function of Mercury in astrology. Which is kind of connectivity, commerce, trade, things of that nature. So if you just put those things together, it's occult currency, occult money.
Yeah.
No different really, I think, from our dollar bill in our pocket, but I think it's just another higher echelon of it, that, has some concerns if they're just throwing right out there in the name that it's occult currency, right? And then the other thing, I kind of like tying some things to the passage in Genesis 3:22, which I would say that the Skull and Bones 3:22 logo has to do with that. Maybe there's some other things involved, but it makes a lot of sense to me because that's the passage where, Adam and Eve get the gnosis of the serpent, and now they say man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And, that's the death moment, right? But death to the occultists means a lot different things than we would normally be accustomed to. And I think that this might be the idea of death that they might refer to sometimes, where this death is seen as a good thing. It's seen as, going away from the creator, which they think is death. And then they're the ones that illuminate you to his control or whatever. Now, obviously that fits within the whole Gnostic demiurge idea, but I think you can kind of play with that because I think there's something around that where maybe they're trying to flip a script on us and kind of get us to hate on the creator through quote unquote exoteric religion. But maybe that's actually the lie in the garden, but we've been sold kind of the ridiculous story about it that, oh, we got punished for eating an apple. God's a big jerk. But, you know, if you look at it, that sometimes I think that that's the candy to bring you into the mystery religion. And they look at it allegorically, but I say, hey, what if we look at it allegorically? We don't have to worry so much about the literal component of it and just flip the script. Maybe, you know, the creator's not so bad, but we're in a world where, you know, he, she, it, whatever you want to call it, is allowed to be slandered by this false system for some higher reason, higher purpose. And that's kind of part of our world here, deciphering, you know, between what is real and what is not. And I think that this passage is a really great example of the, you know, the schism, you know, no pun intended for my channel name, to kind of separate a lot of the ideas in these theological views. So, you know, I kind of will tie it back to this because there's a lot of weird allusions that we'll go into to the ideas of Genesis and Eden and whatever that's built into the cryptocurrency logos. So, you know, they always throw that stuff in there. And then you see here they have, you know, all of these luminescent things happening. You know, obviously that's just marketing and stuff like that. You make things look high tech and futuristic. It's going to invoke something in people. But I think that this gnosis or illumination in the garden, that is their understanding of all of this illumination aspects in a lot of their logos and whatnot. So, can move on to the next one. And this is what kind of, you know, got me thinking a lot about this with the idea of the Knights Templar. And, if you read a lot of these esoteric doctrines, Albert Pike, Madame Blavatsky, they think that the Templars are the true Kabbalists, Gnostic, Essene occultists that, you know, are the forefathers of their secret doctrines. But what they're known famously for is trying to infiltrate the Vatican. And at that time, the Vatican being the more Orthodox tradition. So they're trying to, pretend to be Orthodox, infiltrate, and then rule behind the scenes, you know, like the occultists do. Their occult rule, right?
Right.
And so the masses get one thing, and then they're constantly going through these initiation processes, in my opinion, to put these things out there to initiate us into their mystery religion, but through very subtle increments. And I think that that's why all of these rituals can be attached to so many things that we see in world events. And we talked about this in our 9/11 discussion. So, I don't know, before I get into this, is there anything you wanted to touch upon or ask?
No, this is going to be very interesting, Michael. It's like everything else. Everything is occulted. I try to explain in all of my shows that the controllers have their hands into everything. And as we spoke before the show, when I did do the show with Sophia, the point I had made was that even the blockchain and cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and so on, these are controlled by the controllers. There's nothing that is going to be put out there that is meaningful, that is going to slip under their radar. And I think that that's very important for people to understand. So I know a lot of folks in the truth community and the alternative research community have been, like you mentioned before, waving the flag for cryptocurrency and the blockchain and so on. But I don't see it as the savior or the panacea that how others do see it that way. I mean, I don't see it that way.
Yeah, and like we talked about before we started the show, you know, technology is a tool, of course, and so it can be used in, you know, good and bad ways, but there comes a limit, I think, where the technology becomes destructive. You know, transhumanist stuff and all that kind of thing. But in terms of monetary systems, you know, you think about the idea of creating something from nothing and believing it has value, kind of like the Big Bang Theory. You know,
right?
Everything came from nothing. It seems to be pretty similar to a lot of the fiat currency ideas. And so that traces back to the Templars, where, you know, people will debate this in history, but of course the occultists view the Templars and their Gnostic theology as being, you know, the true Templars and what they align themselves with. And then they kind of crap on what they think are false Templars. So, you know, there's this esoteric, exoteric thing going on with it. But if we go back to, some of the symbolism surrounding them. The number 13 obviously plays a big role with the Templars. Madame Blavatsky talks about how their leader, Jacques de Molay, was burnt at the stake in 1313 AD, even though history tells us it's 1314. But, Friday the 13th, all that stuff. The number 13 really harkens back to this idea of the Templars.
Right.
And so, of course, if you look at the dollar bill, there's a ton of 13s built into it, and I have them all outlined here. And I'll just say really quickly that all of these slides are from my Occult Cryptocurrency series. So it's a 7-video series, I believe, and everything that I'm talking about here is sourced from that. So you can go through it and watch if you'd like. And there's a lot on some of these slides. I won't touch upon everything, but it's just there if people want to pause and go through some of the stuff they can, or they can go watch the series. But anyway, so, tons of 13s, the arrows, the olive branches, or the leaves, the olives on the olive branches, and then, the shield has 13 stripes. The eagle itself represents the number 13 in tarot. It's because it's for the card of Scorpio, the death card, and then there's, 13 stars in the little hexagram, 13 letters in E pluribus unum, 13 layers of brick, Anno Equeptus, 13 letters. So it's everywhere. And then, of course, the occult's idea of deity is this androgynous essence that is metaphysical. It's outside of creation. And so it's this oneness, this wholeness. So I think it's interesting that we say, in God we trust on the dollar bill, but then there's a giant 1 underneath it. I wonder if that's like a hidden illusion. I'm not sure, just speculating there, but I think it's kind of funny because 1 is so big. And then the $1 bill is the one they put most of the occult stuff on. The other ones have some esoteric things, and people can do the whole 9/11 origami thing. But, this is the bill that has most of the stuff built into it.
So, Michael, what does the number 13 represent to them?
Well, if you think about it, the sun through the zodiac, the 12 apostles in Christ being the 13th member and probably the most, obviously the most important amongst the 12. And so, in the astrotheology understanding of the Bible, they obviously tie Jesus to the sun, so that would be 13 amongst the 12 zodiacs. So,
okay.
And so this all sources back to the idea of the secret doctrine of Christ and the revelation of St. John. And I think that if people want to understand this a little bit better, read Albert Pike's chapter on Morals and Dogma called The Knights Kadosh. It's chapter 30. Which we'll get into in a second. But also another interesting thing is the number 13 has associations to death and resurrection because that's the story of the Templars. Their death in 1313, and they're going to be resurrected through various Cathar prophecies, as I've covered in some of my other series. But the whole point is it's very tied to the zodiac sign of Scorpio, which is the sign of death and resurrection, death and rebirth in astrology. And so the 13th card in tarot is for that sign. So you'd have to go through some of my older work. I don't want to confuse people here, but it's basically, the idea of Christ or Hiram Abiff or Osiris in the mystery religion theology of death and resurrection. And okay. I talked all about this in the JFK talk on the Higher Side Chats. I have a series on that, but that's where that original square to globe video that you posted came from. So, the Bible verse that talks about, being born again and resurrecting, that's the idea of the initiate receiving the gnosis of the true light of the mysteries, which of course is tied to the esoteric understanding of Lucifer. But that's John, chapter 3, verse 3. So there's a 33 there. So I wonder if that's one of the many allusions to the number 33 and, all of this esoteric masonry, the idea of being born again and creating this gnosis. So, and then 13 times 3, another interesting number. Never mind. Nix that. I'm wrong on
that's
that.
Okay.
I wanted to say the JFK assassination. That's what I meant to say. 11/22, right? That date turns into the number 33, add them together, and that was part of, the rituals of the death and resurrection of John F. Kennedy that I've talked about before. So this is all connected to this idea of the serpent force. And if you look at this tarot card at the bottom right, is Mercury the magician, and he has a serpent Ouroboros around him as his belt. And that is the force that you utilize in magic. It's this active principle. This is through the will in which you use that force. And it's kind of like the idea of Star Wars, the Force is just something to be utilized, and the idea of balancing and creating equilibrium of, black and white, good and evil or whatever into this wholeness, this oneness is part of the goal of the adept. So it's all kind of tied into the idea of the Knights Templar. And then you think about their hidden doctrines and then their currency, their hidden currency and their magic surrounding it. You can kind of tie it to these ideas of cryptocurrency. And that was kind of one of the main points I wanted to emphasize early.
All right.
And so the next slide, like that chapter I talked about in Morals and Dogma, the whole point of that chapter, it tells the story of the Templars from Albert Pike's perspective. And if you read through it, his teaching is that Freemasonry and these esoteric societies use their enemies to their advantage. And this is a quote taken right at the beginning of the chapter. He says, "We often profit more by our enemies than by our friends." And he says, "We support ourselves only on that which resists, and we owe our success to opposition." So the Masons love to use the enemies, which is the quote unquote profane, right, in order to bring their goals into fruition. And the reason I put "we support ourselves only on that which we resist" in red is because that's actually an Eliphas Levi quote, the guy who created the Baphomet.
Yes.
And Albert Pike constantly cites him, but he doesn't actually give you the source that he's citing from. So some say he plagiarizes, but some say that the initiate reading through Morals and Dogma should know who he's quoting from, kind of like a hidden thing there. So, and of course the Templars all tie back to Baphomet, right? So there's a lot of things that resort back to this idea of the Knights Templar. And then in the mystery religion, they understand the Knights of Templar descending from the Knights of Malta and the Knights Hospitaller, all back to the day of, the Crusades and the Knights of St. John. They're all kind of seen as one and the same if you go back to the root doctrines. Now, I'm not saying that anybody who's in these societies is necessarily practicing this mystery religion, because there is an orthodox component, and that's the point of this chapter in Morals and Dogma, where Albert Pike actually reads from a letter from an Orthodox person in the Vatican at this time. And what he does is he lets him do the work. He lets his writings tell the story of the Templars. But Albert Pike just interjects when he thinks the guy is given, disinfo or something like that. So he lets them reveal most of it, and then he'll tell you where the esoteric stuff needs to step in and, keep it real, right?
Okay.
So,
very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that chapter, it's not very long. I recommend anybody to read that if they're interested in the mystery religion's perspective on the Templars, because I think that it really, quote unquote, illuminates a lot of what's going on with this stuff.
Very good. I have Morals and Dogma, so I'll have to take a look at it.
Yeah, I think it's very revealing. So if we go on to the next slide, this is something that I thought was interesting, because you think that with all the hype around cryptocurrency and blockchain in the truther world, I kind of like listening to the general buzz, because with the buzz, it might not be necessarily connected to all the facts, right? But that's kind of what's most important to the occultists. They want to manipulate the mass consciousness. And now it might be in a smaller group, right? And so if the truthers would be seen as the opposition to these esoteric societies, then based on what we just read from Albert Pike, they want to use us to their advantage. And I think that we can all agree that that probably happens a lot, especially when we're constantly arguing and fighting about silly things. So my question immediately would be, are they using the people in the truther world to try to bring about the control system through cryptocurrency and get them the ones to ironically be ushering in the New World Order? Again, these are just questions, but it would fit their doctrine. And so my question was also, well, if there's all this crypto stuff coming out and everyone's like, oh, it's so great, we got to, start using it to get away from government and whatnot. Well, if it was really the case, wouldn't the elites be, struggling to catch up? Wouldn't they be like, oh, crap, we need to start using all this crypto stuff? But as I went through these things, it seems like a lot of this stuff has already kind of been established and talked about for a while.
Yep.
And so I thought it was interesting, the royal family wedding that got everyone all in an uproar. One thing that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, is that how you say it? I don't even know. I don't keep tabs on the royal family.
Meghan Markle. That's what I thought it was.
Okay, whatever it is. Obviously, I don't keep tabs on the royal family very well.
M's,
but
yeah.
When they tied the knot, they were being gifted a new cryptocurrency called the royal coin. So I thought that was interesting. So, when you're giving a gift of crypto to, the English royal family, I'd say that that's kind of a red flag. I don't know how you feel about it.
No, it's a red flag.
And then you have Queen Elizabeth here, obviously much younger, but she's a Knight of Malta. So I just wonder, what doctrines are attached to these things in the present day versus back in the 1300s, where there seemed to be a struggle that was more about infiltrating, the more orthodox traditions. And now I wonder, when did that infiltration become, more on the esoteric side of things, and for how long, and, how much of it is actually just being revealed now because they probably just don't care. They're just revealing the whole plan because they just, in their mind, they have the truth and they're going to bring it to fruition. That's their quote unquote destiny. You can kind of get that from a lot of their writings. And so
I noticed you had Nelson Mandela in the previous chart. He had Knights of Malta garb also.
Yeah. And so that's another interesting thing. All of these revolutions and these people who are persecuted. I've been going through a lot of history recently for some upcoming projects, and there's so many revolutions that we're kind of taught were quote unquote enlightening, like the French Revolution, Age of Enlightenment and stuff like that. But it seems like there was very much a hidden hand in there to bring about these things. Same thing with the Bolsheviks, and they're all turning against monarchy and Orthodox religion and creating a lot of bloodshed around it. And so, throughout history, a lot of these rebellions, they on the surface might seem like they're for good causes. And I wonder what really happened with Nelson Mandela and, his whole, imprisonment and stuff like that. And then he's a weird character for that whole Mandela effect too. I mean, it's based off of him, right?
Right.
So, it's kind of a strange character, I think. And then having him involved in one of these societies, another kind of red flag.
And we won't get into the fact that there were many researchers that claimed that we're missing about 1,000 years of history, that it was made up.
The so-called Dark Ages, right? And then you think about the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, that's enlightening that Dark Age. And when you go through a lot of these esoteric doctrines, they're constantly using the Dark Age as an example of, everything was so freaking awful. And, again, I'm not being some apologist for the Orthodox Catholic Church, but in a lot of my research, especially on Hypatia and Giordano Bruno and occult science, they're definitely distorting a lot of that and making it seem to be a lot worse than it is. And ironically, in these rebellions that destroy monarchy and church create way more bloodshed than a lot of, the Inquisition really ever did, as far as I am starting to see. So it's kind of a weird thing for me looking at some institutions that I've always kind of roll my eyes at, but seeing that maybe there's more to it. That's just something to think about, in the future. In some of my work, I'll be getting into that. But back to the subject at hand. We have Prince Harry here with a little Masonic hidden hand pose. That's actually a sign for the Master of the Second Veil in Freemasonry. You can find that in Duncan's Freemasonic Ritual and Monitor. And then there's some Prince of Liechtenstein who said blockchains will change a lot of stuff, and he wants to use it to make their state more efficient. And, all these Euro royalty are talking about cryptocurrency, it seems. So interesting how these high-ranking folks are kind of promoting blockchain. And the next slide, kind of complicated, but the whole point of this is just that it is interesting that a lot of this technology is utilizing all of these encryption codes and ciphers and things like that. And that's the whole point of the blockchain as far as I understand it. They're trying to, crack codes and encrypt things to make things stronger, more secure. I don't know if I have that right exactly, but this goes back to the idea of cryptology, which this is the bottom right picture with all of these symbols and the numbers attached. That's from Madame Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine, or excuse me, Isis Unveiled. I have the pages there if you want to check them out. This chapter 8 actually is also about the Templars. This is her take on it. And so this is how they dealt with their fiat money. They encrypted things, and supposedly when you get somewhere, they would decipher it and then they'd give you the amount that you're supposed to get. So I just wonder if maybe perhaps the esoteric element to a lot of this blockchain cryptology is, just like a super beefed up version of something that was started many, many moons ago.
Yeah.
And you can see a lot of, interesting, logos with a lot of cubes. And, we're going to get into the cube later, but this diagram talks about, something having no physical form, no intrinsic value, and it goes through this cryptocurrency system, and they transform it into having value. And so, I'm not going to pretend I know how all that stuff works, but the point is, the cryptology goes back to a lot of the Templars' ways of dealing with their money back in the day.
That's a good slide, Michael.
To bring it back to the idea of Malta, in that same chapter I talked about with Madame Blavatsky in Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, Chapter 8, she talks about the original Templars, the super secret awesome ones, as having their roots to the number 13, where they'd meet every 13 years, 13 in number, at Malta. That's part of their ritual, I guess. And it's pretty interesting that when the Knights of Malta celebration happened for a 900-year celebration back in 2013, right? Another 13. You can see a lot of these things starting to be tied together. And then there was motifs of the Pope being the 13 member standing in the middle of Knights of Malta on either side. We'll check out that in a second. But I think it's interesting that in crypto news, they said that the largest exchange of cryptocurrency moved to the island of Malta. So pretty interesting that you're bringing that crypto technology to, returning to the source, kind of.
Right.
And so this thing called Binance, I guess,
yes,
moves to Malta. And so it says, I'll just read the little thing here below. It says, Binance, the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange by volume, has announced plans to open up an office in the small Mediterranean island nation of Malta in Europe in order to start a fiat to crypto exchange. So again, are they doing an alpha and omega here, trying to tying it back to the source? I don't know. And then the Knights of Malta logo actually supposedly has cryptology built into it. And you can see the bottom right logo with the logo itself divided into these smaller triangles and things of that nature with hidden information into it. I actually don't know what book that is from. I think it's from some sort of occult book. It's just an image I found, so I can't really source that. But obviously, that information is out there. And then the last thing I'll mention on the top left, I think it's interesting that there's a public key and a private key to these, encryptions of blockchain technology and whatnot. So think about, an exoteric key to doctrines and then an esoteric key to them. And the occultists always talk about the Kabbalistic books of the Zohar and the Sefer Yetzirah as being keys. They always use that word key to unlocking the mysteries of the Old Testament. So we've talked about this before, where the Old Testament is obviously seen as this dualistic God, separateness, blessing Israel, then cursing Israel. And so that esoteric key of those Kabbalistic books is supposed to unlock the true oneness of the mystery religion from where it all came. And of course, they say that ties back to Eastern religion, Eastern traditions, and they think that the Orthodox just bastardized all of these, Hindu type religions and whatnot, and Buddhist religions. That's Blavatsky will talk about that all the time in her books. So it's just kind of funny that, there you go. Esoteric, exoteric right there built into the system itself.
Yes.
No different than our political system, anything else with the Freemasons and Solomon's Temple, and then the middle door, the middle pillar that we talked about in our 9/11 video, that's hidden to the rest of the world, and that's the unity one, right?
Right.
So if we move on, we can elaborate a bit on the Vatican. So the Vatican, there's an article from the 5th of November, which was, of course, Guy Fawkes Day, and the whole gunpowder plot. the V for Vendetta movie that touched upon it. So I just thought it was an interesting date to release the article. I don't know if this guy knew it or not. So anyways, the Vatican was exploring Bitcoin and blockchain in an effort to eradicate the human slave trade. So of course it's always done under philanthropy, humanitarianism, the Vatican having more wealth than, per capita than anywhere else. And then they tell, the United States we're too greedy and we need to share all our resources and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
while the Pope sits on a gold throne.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was Pope Francis's, trip that cost I don't know, it was like millions of dollars for him to come over to the U.S. with all the security and stuff that, the Catholic Church paid for. But that's, the donations from people going to church all paying millions of dollars for the Pope to come over to tell us that we're too greedy, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, you can see the picture here with the Knights of Malta and Pope Francis. So he's the 13th Christ member, right? With the 6.
I was just noticing that 6 and 6 on his side.
Yeah, so you have 12 zodiac represented by the Knights of Malta, and then you have the Pope in the middle illuminating all of them, right? And so you have a picture of Christ in the Vesica Pisces design behind, and that's the idea of birthing the Christ consciousness, the gnosis of the mystery religion. And again, obviously the Orthodox would take this as all very blasphemous, but this is their occult expressions of these things. So This ties back to Madame Blavatsky and, the Knights of Malta and the 13 motif. So just pointing out that all of this stuff just keeps circling back. It's kind of like their Ouroboros, circling back to itself, essentially. So speaking of keys and inner and outer keys, this is also something that I've touched upon before in some of my other video series. And so we know that the Vatican is laid out like a giant keyhole, right? And so you need those esoteric keys to unlock the biblical scriptures. And probably people have seen the idea of the cube being folded out into a cross. And that's the idea of, the cube representing Earth and then having a Saturn component to it, square geometry that we talked about. And then Christ is the gnosis, which unlocks that, right? And so the logos on the left with the cube and the cross, these are taken from crypto and blockchain logos. So these are just logos that are put out to describe this technology. And so I think it's interesting, again, they have this inner and outer key. I added in the words inner and outer and esoteric and exoteric, but that's the whole point. And then that unlocks it into the cross. And the Vatican keyhole at St. Peter's Basilica has all of these motifs built into it. You kind of have to look for certain aspects of it a little bit harder, but what you have on the right side, I have it outlined. You have the keyhole, and then you can see that there's a cube where the cross is on top of. So you could say that there's a cube and then the cross is on top could be a motif of that folding out. And then the other interesting thing is that you can see there's a design within this keyhole. There's an 8-pointed star, but you can take the Chiron glyph in astrology, which is to the bottom left there. There's an older version of it. There's an original one, which actually is a 6-pointed star with an upside down cross. And then they modified it to be just like that letter K with the circle at the bottom. So you can actually transpose both of those designs into this keyhole with that cross down below. So Chiron is a comet in astrology. It's most notably associated with the ideas of Christ. It has to do with this wounded healer, this suffering for a higher spiritual purpose. And in astrology, Chiron orbits between Saturn and the outer planets. So the idea of Saturn being the cube, the last visible planet, the last planet that the senses can perceive in five-sense reality. Well, to get to the outer planets that we must use, Promethean technology to see with telescopes, then Chiron is the key that unlocks those outer planets. And the outer planets are seen as non-dualistic, only divine, things like that. So this idea of this key taking the inner world and unlocking it to the outer world is all through the idea of Christ being this mediator to the Father. And so you can see that in the Cairo logo, which is the XP you'll see in the Vatican. And think about Chiron, Cairo. Some people will pronounce it not Cairo, but I do believe that the Greek that's used in the Bible is used to pronounce it that way. So I think phonetically, we know that phonating certain words has a lot of meaning in the occult, just the vibratory aspect of it. So the whole point is Christ unlocks, the secrets of the Old Testament. And you can take that in the Orthodox or the esoteric version, because that's the idea of Christ in the Orthodox, is he's teaching the true law of the Old Testament to the Pharisees. And then obviously in the occult, he's unlocking the dualistic nature of Jehovah. So it's all built into all of this religious stuff. So my question is, why is there all this religious stuff built in to something that shouldn't be religious at all? It's just freaking technology, right?
Right.
So there you go. These are just these weird things that I found popping up.
Now, this is a great slide. This is a really good slide, Michael.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing I'll just make a note of, Chiron was discovered in 1977. Interesting year with the 77 in it. But the basilica was built, I think, in like the 1500s. So you could argue it the different ways. Was there some sort of symbology built in that they used later when they discovered something important? Or was Chiron discovered a long time ago and then they just released it to the public? They allowed the inner key to become public. I don't really know. It's, all speculation, but interesting to think about. Okay, so speaking of religious symbolism in blockchain and crypto logos and technology, this slide demonstrates just how much is built into so many of these bigger companies. So a lot of people have already shown this before, but back in, I forget what year it was, back in the day, The Economist, released this magazine saying there's going to be a world currency, and they predicted 2018 was the year. And so they have this phoenix rising out of the ashes of the fiat money. And interestingly enough, they have the number 10 on the coin, and they have this line shooting through the ring. So again, the idea of Saturn expanding beyond Saturn's rings. When you see a lot of these astronaut Apollo logos or their space missions, a lot of them will have the ring of Saturn, but they'll have the Apollo or whatever space shuttle going through the ring. So again, this idea of breaking free of border, restriction, and limitation, which are all attributes of Saturn in astrology.
I was looking at the Economist cover, Michael, and seeing the number 10, and I also thought of the ones and zeros from a digital perspective.
Yeah.
Right. So that's probably, if I had to take a guess, what the message is, or the symbolism is that there's going to be digital money coming our way.
Yeah, ones and zeros, they're their own polarity, right?
Right.
Unifying them. And then you unify them into one, it's the number 10. And 10 is the number of the entire Sephiroth and the Tree of Life that we kind of talked about before. So it's encompassing everything into one, right? So anyways, the other thing that's interesting, I talked about that passage in John 3:3 about being born again of the Spirit. Well, that's the nature of this tarot card you see here. It's called the Judgment card. And that's what it is. That's the death and the resurrection. So you have the people coming out of the coffin and the child is born in between the two pillars. The two become one. And this is the initiate's gnosis moment. And so this is the phoenix rising from the ashes motif. That's what it represents. So the idea of being in death, right? You receive this gnosis that will lead you out of death. So back to Genesis 3:22, right? The knowledge of good and evil. And so just keep in mind that this card has a Hebrew letter attached to it. It's called the Hebrew letter Sheen. We'll get into that because this is essentially the Steemit logo. We'll get into that a little bit later, but just remember that motif. And this, Revelation 13, right? The 13th chapter has this, motif as well. The idea of a one world government, one world currency, being attached to it.
It's just crazy. I'm looking at all the different images you have there. Eden Chain, Sophia TX, Obelisk, Genesis Mining.
The Logos Fund.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And so, if we just go through them real quick, Bitcoin Millennium, you think about the new millennium, the new Jerusalem, that's in Revelation 20.
Yep.
And then you have, like you said, Eden Chain. And also, if you look, it's kind of hard to see, but you'll see in the top right of that Eden Chain logo, there's the three pillars that we talked about at Daily Plaza. It's sideways, but it's there stemming from the Bitcoin logo.
Yep.
And so we talked about how that's connected to Daley Plaza, the World Trade Center design going up, the former Twin Towers, the triple tier design, and then also Sandy Hook Bay. Again, it's not where the Sandy Hook event took place, but they have a giant trident built into a pier out in the middle of that bay. So, look at where all these events take place. And so they always have this triple tiered design. And that is that letter that I talked about, the Hebrew letter Sheen. It's a triple flamed letter. So
yep.
Keep that in mind. And then, obviously Sophia, the Gnostic Sophia, which is synonymous with the esoteric concept of Lucifer, according to Madame Blavatsky. I went over all this early in the Occult Science series. Of course, the obelisk, with all these kind of black cube or, square plane geometry behind it. And we know the obelisk is, a solar fire symbol for the active male force. And this company, Obelisk, I believe that they make crypto mining machines that you can buy. So there you go. Why did they decide that the obelisk, needs to be their logo? I don't really know. And then think about the idea of Eden mining. They have the apple here, and then it's bound by, some sort of web or, blockchain, right? But the apple is the gnosis. So if you take the idea of Saturn and restriction and limitation, the demiurge, and you apply that illumination to it, that is giving the gnosis through the concept of what Saturn is. So of course, Saturn to them is the demiurge, the Old Testament deity, the old creator. They think that that's restriction and limitation. So they want to perform this idea of equilibrium that's attached to it, where they are equal with God, right? Like Genesis. You need to be like, God wants you to not see that you're greater than him or equal to him. And that's what he's hiding from you. And so that's the whole idea of that story from the Gnostic standpoint. So what do you do when you mine in the Garden of Eden? You're digging for secrets, right? Secrets of the mystery. And so you're digging through occult doctrines. So you can kind of apply all this stuff. And then there's this thing called Genesis mining. So the same thing. You're mining in the book of Genesis for occult secrets. Just apply the allegory, and then they have this Omnia blockchain technology attached. So you think about the idea of being omniscient, one, all-seeing, and then they have a pyramid as the A of the Omnia, and they have the two pillars of the solar glyph in there. So all this sun symbolism, the two pillars, mining and Genesis, and then of course Genesis Mining is launching the first mining fund, which is called the Logos Fund. So Christ is the Logos, who, again, unlocks the secrets of the Old Testament. So it's all there.
Well, for folks that are running around thinking that cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and all that stuff is free of all of this control, this chart by itself, Michael, with all of its occult symbols and meanings, should be very clear to anybody who is really serious about doing some deep research about what this is all about and who's bringing it all about. More importantly, who's bringing it all about. It's the same group of controllers, occultists, magicians that are behind this. There's no doubt about it. I mean, take a look. It says one is in Hong Kong. I mean, it's all over the world. So this is a worldwide initiative that they're rolling out. So
yeah, it's interesting. A lot of this stuff comes from China. And that's what they said, that the Binance place that moved to Malta was originally from China, I believe. And of course, China is one of those places where people are talking about how they're doing the social credit score stuff. They're trying to implement all that stuff. And so, who knows what's going on with all of that? Is that part of the technology that's going to bind people into social credit score stuff? Because if you're on the blockchain and your stuff's there forever, can they seek out what you posted and hold that against you? So you posted something that was politically incorrect 5 years ago. That might be some sort of, karmic debt, quote unquote, that they find for you, and they come back and they dock you and you can't have access to certain things. I don't know. I mean, that's the nightmare scenario, but you can definitely see the potential for that. Hopefully it wouldn't come to that, but, again, that's the concern.
Well, I read that China is rolling it out. You're going to have a social score in China. And as Michael was saying, if you are saying something that is something a dissident might say, something that defies what the government storyline is, or the government approach to things, and you're basically perceived as being difficult or pushing back, free thinking, then you're going to get dinged, and you're going to be not allowed to engage in certain things in society. Maybe they'll hold back you getting a loan. Maybe they'll hold back you having access to jobs, as an example. This is crazy stuff. Also in China, I read that they are rolling out facial recognition technology. So that's really, in my view, really a sandbox, a playground for the New World Order, for the Illuminati, however you want to label these folks, the controllers, to start rolling out their technologies and testing it out before they roll it someplace else.
Yeah, I was listening to, I think it was Jay Dyer was talking about how he read through Rockefeller's, I think his autobiography, the one that said, I'm proud of being part of the New World Order cabal or whatever. And
right.
I think he was like praising Mao's China and was like all about that model or something like that. I think that's what he said when he wrote it. So, something about China as a blueprint or a model, I think that, people have been saying this for a long time. And I think that, is it Max Egan? I think he talks a lot about this social credit score stuff. I think I've heard him in a few talks talking about that.
I think Max has spoken about it.
Yeah, maybe checking out some of his stuff might help people expand on that if they want. But the last thing I'll mention is we have the Steemit logo in the middle at the far right. And so you see the three pillar kind of thing going on there, or like the triple flame. And that's exactly what that letter is in that judgment card I talked about, the Hebrew letter Sheen, the triple flamed letter of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
So anyways, now we can think about the idea of blockchain, right? We divided up crypto and currency in an esoteric sense, so let's do it with blockchain. And, obviously think of the block. We've been over this a lot, the idea of the square in Freemasonry, plain, flat geometry that's based in the earth, material world, five sense reality, and of course that represents the profane if they don't have the true light of the mysteries or the spiritual compass. And this would be the Saturn lead in alchemy, transmuting this old dead doctrine into something new and illuminating it. But of course, through that illumination process, they have no problem using terror and sending you into darkness or the Negredo as part of it. And you can see that expressed in a lot of Hollywood movies like the movie The Game or Fight Club. They bring them into this terrifying moment, and that's where their illumination comes from. So you can obviously apply that to a lot of the, quote unquote terror events that go on. And then they always have some way to unify it. Obviously the twin pillars of 9/11 unified into one, but then they have these benefit concerts with these androgynous Venusian musicians uniting the world, like One Love Manchester, all that kind of stuff, so it's the same script over and over again. So then you add the chain to it, and the chain really stands out to me as the story of Prometheus Bound, because he's such a huge figure in all of this esoteric philosophy. And obviously the Rockefellers having the giant statue of Prometheus at Rockefeller Center.
Now, Michael, Prometheus would be
Prometheus is the Lucifer figure, the enlightening people, but he's trapped by the profane who won't understand this higher gnosis. So the liver that is, plucked out every day by the raven or the eagle or whatever bird you want to, throw in there. That is the idea of the initiate being persecuted by the masses. And so when you read through the Secret Teachings of All Ages or Morals and Dogma or, Madame Blavatsky's work, they'll tell you who they think their persecuted heroes of the mysteries are. And surprise, surprise, Jacques de Molay of the Knights Templar is like top of the list in most instances. And even Howard Pike says that when the Freemasons are initiated, the symbols of Jacques de Molay are there for the initiate, but they aren't told quite what it really represents. And so this death and resurrection, you're really just doing a death and resurrection of Jacques de Molay. But again, they use it as the consciousness of an initiate. So anybody who is persecuted for the mystery religion is tied to the figure of Hiram Abiff or Christ or Osiris, whatever you want to do. So Prometheus, you can just kind of lump it all in. Certain stories have different allegories or manifestations attached to them that might differ, but that same idea of being persecuted by the profane where, they're just trying to help us. They're just trying to illuminate us, right? But
Right.
of course, that's how a master manipulator would try to give you the Stockholm syndrome, right? And that's kind of the issue the truthers have all the time, is trying to tell people these people don't care for you, but they can't conceive that all of these nice sounding things and humanitarianism and open borders and whatever, it's all just for the good of humanity, but there's a very sinister agenda behind it. So that's, to me, encapsulated in the figure of Prometheus. And of course, Blavatsky says Prometheus is universal philanthropy, so it's spreading the mystery religion. So in some way, I mean, you think about, back in the Middle Ages or whatever, that the Orthodox Church was trying to, go out and convert people to Christianity in that form. And people get so upset about that. But to me, the mystery religion is doing the same thing, but they're doing it in a much more hidden way. At least with the exoteric religions, they're telling you to your face that they're trying to convert you. Whereas the mystery religion is just hiding it everywhere, putting in movies, seeping into your subconscious. And then to me, they unlock it in certain mass events where that steers people into where they want to go with it. So, again, what's the Rockefellers tied to? The United Nations Foundation. They supplied, the land for them in New York City. They're so much tied to all of their philanthropy. So that's what Prometheus is, according to Blavatsky, universal philanthropy. So there you go. This divine intellect, this divine spark, this divine flame that we talked about, illuminating the darkness, or at least their version of darkness, right? So we can bring this to some examples of how it might be utilized. So here we have Prometheus at Rockefeller Center. And, again, once you understand the doctrine, the symbolism isn't that difficult to derive. You have Prometheus, he's bound to the rock of matter, right? The 5 sense reality, the square, and he's bound by Saturn's ring. And if you look closely at that ring, there's all these zodiac signs. So it's this idea that you're bound to the zodiac. You'll hear this in a lot of New Age doctrines. You're not your zodiac chart. You're not your body, your infinite light, all that kind of stuff. But what's interesting is that's what's going on with a lot of the transgender stuff. Not to go on too much of a tangent, but, oh, you're not a male or a female. Like, that's like, it's the same doctrine. Oh, you're beyond what your body is. You're beyond your personality. You're transcendent, all these sorts of things. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize that, maybe having some of my identity attached to the physical world isn't such a bad thing. You know what I mean? But we're all taught that it's so profane and evil. But I think that when it's done in a healthy way, that's actually what's dangerous to the New World Order and all these globalist occultists. That's just a little side note I'd throw out there. But anyways, so Mr. Prometheus is just tortured by all these profane idiots who are attached to the square, and he's just trying to enlighten them, right? So think about the idea we talked about with morals and dogma and using the profane or the enemies of these occultists to their advantage. I think you can derive some of that doctrine from the idea of the Tower of Babel and the EU Parliament building, which is designed by that famous Tower of Babel painting. And people have probably seen this before, but you have this old EU poster where you have all these people building Babel, and it says Europe, many tongues, one voice. So obviously that's the whole point of the Tower of Babel in the Old Testament, is that there was a one world, unity that was, the creator was not a fan of, and it was, a rebellion against God. But obviously when you go through some of the esoteric doctrines, they usually have some sort of reverence for this, and they, I won't really get into that, but obviously the EU and this uniting Europe, which is the organization that, has a lot of sinister things tied to it, especially with all of the immigration agendas. You obviously see what they're trying to state here. And then if you blow up the people building this EU Babel, it's a bunch of blockheads in the bottom left. Of course, the baby has the circular head, right? It has that innocence, but then as people get older, they get molded into a certain viewpoint. And so is this the idea of using the profane to build Babel, and the occultists are the ones orchestrating it? They're little minions doing their great work. I don't know, but it would seem to suggest that.
Michael, let me ask you a question. I wonder this sometimes, especially when you go through this work, and I'm thinking about it again. There's a reason why they have stepped this up big time, big time, as far as just rolling all of this esoteric symbolism and all of these concepts out to the public, to the masses. Do you believe that there's some kind of shift event taking place in the future where this will serve some kind of purpose? Or are they just spinning their wheels and hoping that by acting out the mysteries and acting out their occult symbols that they can make something happen? This is, is something going to happen and they're preparing, or are they trying to make something happen, I guess is what I'm asking.
My opinion is that I think they believe they're on some sort of timeline. And we talked about this a bit with the root race cycles.
Yeah.
And I think that they view it as an opportunity. And it's very interesting how a lot of the transhumanist stuff, when you go through some of it, they say, we don't want to go into a new dark age like those old Orthodox dark ages. But they do say that there's a danger of it. But they're all like, we can't let that happen. We can't let that happen. And so, I just wonder with this idea of the millennium, right, the 1,000 years, if there's something symbolic about it. Because if they have indeed added to history, then none of the dates are probably really all that accurate. And who knows, 1313, the Knights Templar, maybe they just made that date to fit their 13 number that they love.
Right.
Who knows? But I tend to think that they might be on some sort of timeline. And since they believe they have the truth, they believe that they are, the ones destined to be the adepts or elect, I think, in the book of Revelation from their own interpretation. If things don't go according to plan, I think that they might expose themselves and to me, I mean, again, I don't like to get into politics. I think the left-right thing is obviously a Masonic creation, but the issues that are at hand when they're being talked about in a way that's dangerous to them, I think that that's what's important. And so you see all these people realizing the insanity of the quote-unquote left. And to me, this is just whatever doctrines that are there that are part of the mystery religion, the transgender, everything is through technology, open everything, one world, everything. We're dissolving Saturn, right? We're dissolving borders. That's all got to go. When you see people just even questioning some of those things, all of a sudden people just freak out and become monsters. And I think that is part of quote unquote demons being exposed, where people aren't even like, they're trying to meet halfway, but they won't have it. So I wonder if this is sort of like an indication that they aren't as powerful as we think. Now, granted, I'm not saying that everyone's going to go be a Republican, but I'm just saying on this issue, it's obvious that is dangerous to them. And so I think that regardless if people tie themselves to a political alignment, if you're on the right side of an issue that's dangerous to them, they're going to go, you're going to double down on it all. And I think that maybe some of that shows that maybe they are on some sort of timeline. And so to me, if Revelation is about, lifting the veil of Isis, and they are finally saying, hey, this is the time to initiate everyone to the mystery religion, and we're not even going to be shy about it. So this is where you get all this occult symbolism. Phoenix is rising at the 2012 Olympics, and obviously 2012 was a big hoopla. And I think that it did mean something, but I think that it's not as grandiose. It's not like one event changes everything. I think they want us to think that, but it's this slow kill. But now it's like they're putting it everywhere. They're trying to put it in schools everywhere. It's just like they're doubling down because they believe that this is the time that they might have the most chance to do it. And I think it's tied to astrology and stuff like that. And if people are interested, I did another series after this one called the New World Order Astrological Report. And you don't have to necessarily be interested in astrology, but it just shows how the elites might view certain astrological things going on now. And so I think that that's all tied into this.
Okay, I'm going to be doing a show with Martin Kenny. We're supposed to record it on Thursday, and a lot of his work, Michael, it meshes nicely with your work. And the last time I spoke to Martin, he had said that he believes that 2020 is a very key date for them.
Mm-hmm, me too.
That's what he believes. And so we're going to get more into that when I interview Martin. I don't want to say any more because, I'll probably get it wrong. I'll let Martin explain it.
One thing I can say to that, to kind of give a preview of the New World Order Astrological Series, is that in 1776, the the so-called founding of America, the planet Pluto was in a certain position. And the planet Pluto is the planet that's assigned to that judgment tarot card we talked about, that divine flame. That's the planet in astrology that is tied to it. And that's the planet, I mean, they say it's not a planet now, but whatever. That's the one with the most power in astrology. And so when a planet at a certain event comes all the way back to its original cycle, that's seen as a very powerful time. So we're actually about to cycle back on the Pluto cycle in 2020. Or it's going to be like, it's encroaching. I don't think it happens exactly in 2020, but it's about that time where it's moving towards it. And then, because Pluto moves so slowly, it's between 2020 and 2024 that this is all going to be happening. So if there was some sort of occult agenda with America at the start, I'm not saying everybody would be involved in it, but enough of a secret society, maybe their Phoenix Rising is tied to this Pluto cycle, and America is obviously their greatest New World Order nation. Everything that America does, the world follows along, or they try to make it that way. And so what you were saying there, I think that there's something very important tied to this idea of a Pluto cycle. And again, you can go to my series to elaborate on that if you'd like.
Okay.
But anyways, the last thing I'll mention on this slide is that you have these black cubes, right, being chained together. So that's, the idea of Saturn, but it's all being illuminated, right? So you're illuminating the darkness. So with Prometheus, he's sitting on this rock, which would represent that black cube and bound to Saturn, but he's trying to illuminate it. So now the blockchain, you're seeing that illumination factor that's tied to it. And then, of course, you just have all these logos, blockchain 2018. I'm sure they'll make a blockchain 2019 logo. So I'm not saying that means anything specifically, but when you accompany that with the Economist 2018 version, who knows? And again, as much as they have control over so many things, I'm still of the mind that they're not all powerful because of their arrogance. So when they project something, yeah, sure, they're going for it. But I do believe that our individual resistance to it does mean something, even though it might not seem like it. So, that to me is something that if something doesn't go according to their plan, they're going to get more mad about it. But the more mad they get about it, the more they expose themselves. And I think that, again, ties that whole like walk away thing from the left. It's just sort of like, the more people freak out about something irrationally, the more people in the middle ground start to go the other way. And so I see that as a good thing when it comes to the issues. So if we go on to the next slide, again, we talked about this before, the idea of being a blockhead, being a square man. It's all seen as, this lower stupid thing. And then, but the idea of these blocks building up to the top of the pyramid, you can see like that logo at the top right, 2024. I don't really know anything esoteric about that date other than that Pluto cycle ending I mentioned. But, building up to the capstone. And then you have, I thought this logo was interesting. Actually, just going to move on to the next one. You have this, the bottom right logo I think is really interesting. You have all these people in these black cubicles, right? Slaving away. But then you have this one enlightened dude who's going a little bit deeper and mining Bitcoin below all the profane people up top, right? So again, the idea of mining through profane things, mining through Genesis, the exoteric doctrine, finding these deep hidden secrets of the mysteries. And that's all what alchemy is. It's all breaking things down to their, first cause or whatever. And so there you go. This guy's mining that Saturnian coal to get gold. So it's all alchemy, right? The lead and the gold. Right. And so you have the Bitcoin in the black and gold cubes. And we've talked about the black and the gold stuff with the 9/11 talk. And that's what Bitcoin, that's their color motif, black and gold. So there you go. All of this slave mining to get gold is expressing alchemical thought. And then another thing I just kind of thought was interesting is the idea of the World Wide Web. It's similar to blockchain. You're binding things together, things caught in a web, things chained to one another. And, having this one world unity, we're all bound to each other in some weird internet collective. You know what I mean? You could kind of see this all tied to itself. And then, of course, people have pointed out that the Hebrew letter Vav is is the English letter W, U, and V are all equivalents of it.
Right.
So, you tie the number value to Vav, it's 6. So Vav, 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 666, WWW.
Also Monster Energy drink.
Yeah. There you go. And, the number 666 is a confusing thing from what I've researched, especially in like Crowley land. But to me, just like with anything, there seems to be this exoteric understanding of it, and there's this esoteric understanding. So it all seems to be tied to this death and rebirth ritual that is constantly going on. But there's also an esoteric, exoteric idea of the web and the owl and the weaving spiders come not here that Bohemian Grove has as their motto. That motto is taken from what I understand, A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is a Shakespeare play. And of course, Shakespeare is one of the grand heroes of all this mystery religion doctrine. And people think that, Francis Bacon was actually Shakespeare. And then it's tied to the myth of Arachne and Athena or Minerva in mythology. And so the idea that Arachne wanted to challenge the gods and weave her own web, but the gods showed her. So to me, this might indicate that these occultists think that, they're the gods with their divine intellect, and if we profane try to challenge them, we're going to end up like Arachne. So weaving spiders, don't come here because we'll just destroy you with our higher intellect or knowledge or gnosis or whatever like that. And then
interesting.
This is just my, my assessment.
No, it's a good assessment, because I always wondered what that weaving spiders come not here, what it meant.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it seems like you connected a dot there.
Yeah, it might be, I don't know, but it would be consistent. And then the idea of the owl, people are always going into this. People say it's, Moloch and stuff like that. I think that that's something that we kind of get to just say. That's not actually quite true, but it's very much propagated by the truth community. And I'm not like calling anybody out. I'm not trying to be a jerk about it. I'm just saying that maybe there's something more to that we're kind of confused on, because the owl is a dualistic symbol. For the adepts, it's wisdom. And this is why you see the owl at the Library of Congress with Minerva, right? The wisdom goddess, Sophia, Lucifer, all of those sorts of things are tied to that. It's just the gnosis or the wisdom of the mystery religion. And then for the profane, it's black magic. It's all these hedonistic, disgusting things. So I wonder if like the Alex Jones infiltration thing, we kind of got this black magic ritual for us profane masses to look at. And I'm not making a comment on Alex Jones, his complicity in it or not, but I'm just saying like maybe that was sort of staged for us to see and kind of lead us down a rabbit hole with that. And I'm not saying that there's not weird, messed up rituals that could be involved, but maybe they view it in a way that's different from us, and they probably find some sort of divine thing attached to it. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised they're all messed up,
Well, also, I read that from an occult perspective, the owl can see at night. So, in other words, it can see through the dark, right? And I do believe that Alex Jones did not make his way into Bohemian Grove by sneaking in.
Yeah.
I just never really bought that story. That I always, just as a side note, folks, the security there would be just unbelievable. And there's no way he was creeping through the woods and, with a knapsack or whatever.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Taking it in.
And that comes down to two questions, though. Was he let in and he knew what was going on, or did he think he was being a hero and they just staged it for him to allow him to believe he did something great, and now he's going off on all this other crazy stuff? And an interesting movie. Have you ever seen the movie The Conspiracy? It's kind of loosely based on that.
No.
It's a newer movie. It's kind of like a documentary style about these guys who infiltrate an Illuminati ritual, but they're selected and they're actually ended up being part of the ritual without knowing it. But there's a guy who pretends to be a defector and he lets him in. I recommend anybody watch that, because I think it's a really great movie and it's really well done. It's just called The Conspiracy. If you look at the cover, it's a guy holding a bull mask. It's from 2010, something like that, I think.
I'll watch that tonight.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one. So anyways, I just figured I'd touch upon that because, and the last thing is the UN logo. I mean, people will talk all about the whole flat Earth map thing, but, there's kind of like this web design around the world, and it's 33 sections and obviously targeting the north. And like you talked about the owl seeing in darkness, the north being the direction in darkness in Freemasonry, that's all, darkness, ignorance, Saturn. When they talk about the profane, ignorance is their favorite description of that. And so what do? They illuminate the darkness, or at least allegedly. And so now in the next slide, they want to give us this free, decentralized world Wi-Fi where we're just all connected, and surprise, surprise, it's powered by a blockchain. And then you see the as above, so below logo with the sun glyph motif in there. So I thought that was pretty interesting, with the World Wide Web being now connected to blockchain. So anyways, we talked a little bit about the alchemy with the black and the gold. So I wanted to bring that to Bitcoin. And because Bitcoin is like the number one crypto, right? And it is one that people are kind of espousing a lot. Now, there have been critics of it saying, oh, Bitcoin is the establishment's crypto, but we can use other cryptos. This is just kind of stuff I hear because I'm not really all that into crypto, but, peripherally, you'll always hear these things. So this has a lot of ties, I think, with the Bitcoin logo to actually the Twin Towers, and I'll explain it here. If we look at the bottom left, we can see we have a B and then two pillars, and then we have a figure eight, infinity sign. And you also have, in cryptography, we trust, right? In crypto things and Knights Templar type actions, we trust, right? And that ties back to the dollar bill with the one, in God we trust. And then we have a couple pentagrams on it, and then if we look to the top left tarot card, the Magician, we could see a lot of these motifs. Granted, they're a little bit more esoteric. So I have a little blue text box, and it talks about this card being tied to the planet Mercury. And in astrology, Mercury is the most air planet. It works on the mental plane. It's about it doesn't have emotion. It's neutral. So this is like the idea of communication, money, things like that. There's no emotion attached to just money itself. If people think about, being cold and people being obsessed with money, you kind of see like it's a cold, non-emotional state. And so this is the mental plane, right? When you're just dealing with keyboards and, transferring data, that's all devoid of any emotional content until the human puts emotion behind it, right? So Mercury kind of rules just these functions. And so this is also attached to the idea of the Magician, right? And he's manipulating will and the mental plane and consciousness. So how we perceive things kind of starts in the mental plane. We can be duped into thinking something sounds intellectual if we just kind of have a magic act placed on us, and things like that. And so Mercury rules the sign of Gemini. And so Gemini is an air sign, and obviously Gemini is the two twins, right? The two pillars. And so we have the two pillars on Bitcoin logo, and then we have the as above, so below with the Magician, pointing up and then pointing below. And that's what that infinity sign is. It's connecting the above and the below in harmony and unison. And you can see that logo, the infinity logo, right above the Magician's head. So that's what he's using, that that knowledge. And so you see that same logo, the infinity, on the Bitcoin. And then lastly, like I said, every tarot card has a Hebrew letter associated to it. And the Hebrew letter associated to the Magician card is the Hebrew letter Bet. And Bet in English is equivalent to the letter B. So there you go, a B. And then you have two pillars for the Mercury functions. And then Bet's value in Hebrew is the number 2. So there you go, 2, the Roman numeral 2. So esoterically, all this stuff is built into it. It's kind of like its own tarot card, but unless you understood these correspondences, you wouldn't know. But it performs all the same functions, right? Currency, exchange, and then this esoteric, manipulation of consciousness. And then lastly, if you associate that to the Twin Towers, right? The Gemini twins, and it was about commerce, communication, all these mercurial functions were associated to the Twin Towers. And then, of course, they had this world aspect to it where it was for the entire world, communication, the entire world. So if they're trying to bring this crypto to the entire world, you can kind of connect a lot of these things. And then you have the World Bitcoin Trader logo, where you can see there's an above and a below thing with that serpent force, the tail, right? The eating itself like the Ouroboros, just like the belt on the Magician, that serpent force devouring itself. and one's above, one's below, and then you have the twin pillars, and then the B magician tarot card illusion right there, all built into it.
And the 322.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. The Crypto World International Conference at Times Square in New York was on March 22nd, Genesis 322. And they had the Gemini hedge fund services, surprise, surprise. So there you go. You got your two pillars there meeting at the World Crypto. And then, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, these are all New World Order institutions. The Celsius logo is kind of like the serpent, with the little C with the kind of like a little tail there. And then you also have another crypto consciousness conference in 2017 above it. And you can see the same thing. There's a male and female, the two pillars. And then there is a brain, and this is what's, I think is tied to the mental plane, right? Your brain, you think about your brain is, I think, I transfer data, so there's another mercurial function. And then I think the other interesting thing is if you just take the first letters of Crypto Consciousness Conference, CCC, and C is the third letter of the alphabet, so it's a 333. There's another Kabbalistic number, 33, 33. So cryptocurrency is 33 if you just go by, the abbreviation, right?
Yep.
And so you always see this brain involved, illuminating the brain, the mental plane through Litecoin, which again, Light, Lucifer, Lux, and you have Bitcoin. A lot of the main cryptos have a lot of occult logos tied to them. So there you go. We've had all these giant world conferences on crypto with all these occult symbolism. Do you think that these things just happened out of thin air? I don't know. Yeah,
that's the point I was making before. To think that this is some kind of end run. Three guys in a room somewhere came up with this. It's ridiculous. The people that control this, and it's being spelled out here with all of the occult symbolism.
Yeah, and just think about the idea of the magician card, right? You're manipulating consciousness, creating something from nothing. I don't really understand cryptocurrency. I've heard people, I think, who's the guy who's got the really good radio voice? And he's been on Andy Moggin's show. What's his name? Cliff High, that's it.
Okay.
He just got that. He's got a really nice radio type voice. That's how I just remember him. Anyways, but he was talking all about crypto, and he's kind of like pro crypto. And I'm not saying anything negative about him. I'm just saying he's a guy who's trying to outline the positives of it. And for me, I just don't get it. I don't understand it. Maybe because I'm stupid. But I never understood finance anyways. So I'm going to kind of like, withdraw from the argument, but it's kind of a strange thing to be still having the same argument about what's the actual physical value, what's the physical square, nature that's tied to it. But you think about the occultists, well, the physical world doesn't matter because that's profane. So who gives a shit? Like, I think that might be the viewpoint of a lot of this fiat stuff. But of course, Is that just an excuse for manipulation?
Yeah, I don't want to get into the good or bad discussion either, Michael. I guess my point being is that, again, not to sound like a broken record, but there's a lot of folks in the truth community that believe that this is outside of the controllers, that this is something that is going to undermine their fiat money. It's going to undermine the central banks and all that stuff. And the point I've been trying to make is that I think it's extremely naive to believe that. I think it's extremely naive to believe that the people that control this world, that they would let something like this just, slip through their fingers or kind of manifest itself and then catch them off guard. And, then they're going to be what? Playing defense? No, it doesn't work that way, folks. It does not work that way. They are always at least 1,000 steps ahead of us. Always. Because they have been doing this a very, very long time.
Again, is there anything new under the sun? It's kind of the same tactics over and over again.
Yeah.
And so here we have the black and gold motif. These images are taken from Bitcoin's website. So if you just go there, this is the color motif that they have. And we've talked all about the idea of black and gold used in alchemy, which we'll review upon in a second. But, you have, the sickle, right? Where you use the profane nature, you descend into darkness. That's part of the alchemy. But you find that spiritual gold to release that quote unquote divine spark, that sheen flame that we talked about. That's one of the aspects of alchemical ritual. There's others, but that's a main theme. And I think it's interesting too that they have this play games icon. We have the Bitcoin, and then they have the ace there. Is that like the ace up the sleeve? But also the ace has ties to the idea of like blackjack, like 21 or whatever. And the 21st card in tarot is the world card, which we'll get into a little bit later. But, again, the World Trade Center, Mercury functions, they love to use the same motifs over and over again, but they just kind of mix it up here and there. But anyways, you can also see, there's, hold on. Let me go on to the next slide. This is something that I covered. We don't, there's a lot here just if people want to pause and read it, but this is something I covered in the New World Astrological Report to kind of expand upon this. But this article on the right is taken from the Bitcoin site. So this is an article that they're promoting. And this is about cryptocurrency and blockchain technology being used in virtual reality, sex, and robotics. And it's basically promoting complete sexual liberation through virtual reality. And, again, they never give you any borders or definitions, but they're seeing this is a great thing for everybody. And I'll just read the first paragraph real quickly. Let there be sex, not some sex, sophisticated, technological. Just think, the new technologies emerge every day, opening up new horizons of sexual experience for men and women. So my question is, what kind? Does that tie into pedophilia, bestiality? They don't say, besides that stuff. You know what I mean? There's never any limitations, right? Just like Saturn's restrictions and limitations, they don't want any. And it says everything you could not have experienced in reality for some reasons, and they use the idea of prejudices, ethical norms, embarrassment, guilt, and social stigma, is now available in the virtual environment, whereas emotions and sensations are as close to the real one. So we're bypassing physical reality for a virtual reality, and there's no limitations. And this is all through blockchain and Bitcoin or ICO, which is tied to this kind of technology. And so, again, they're saying that there's no government regulation. And I understand that, in the truther world, we've all been programmed to be like, the government is evil. And obviously it does a lot of evil things. But by bypassing it through all this technology, you're opening up a situation where, what happens when there's really messed up sexual deviance going into virtual reality and people are going to be free to go wherever they want with it. I mean, I don't know. Am I the only one that sees that as a problem?
I mean, this was on the Bitcoin website?
Yes, the tiny URL link is up at the top right there. I know it's kind of small. I can give you the link. You could put in the show notes if you'd like.
Because here's the second paragraph, but that's not all. Imagine that actors and actresses from the screen appear right in your room. And even more, you get at your disposal a porno constructor.
Yeah, you're your own builder. You're your own demiurge, right?
With the help of which you can create a storyline you want. You choose the actors, the stage, the content. All of these will be in the format of the virtual reality. I'm telling you what, Michael, this is just becoming more and more bizarre as we progress down the line here.
Yeah, so if I want to have pan-gender, non-dual sex in virtual reality, I can do it. I mean, it just ties hand in hand with all that stuff, I
don't know. Anyway, I don't want to, I can go on all night about this. This is just it's so deviant. I mean, it really is. I'm sorry, folks. I mean, if this is like, if you think this is great, I don't think it's great. I really don't think. I think we have drifted so far from the mothership, especially with regard to sex, that it's really not even funny. And this is just taking it to a whole nother level. It's just unbelievable.
I agree. And that's ironic that all of these liberation theologies that they give us are actually moving towards more enslavement. I think that a lot of people are starting to understand that. And, as much as it's uncool to think about traditional family values, I think people are starting to see that that's something that prevents all out hell on earth, whether you agree with it or not.
Yeah.
But anyways, the other thing I wanted to mention, we can tie it back to good old Mr. Aleister Crowley. This is what I kind of was thinking about when, he's got those aeons, the aeon of Isis and Osiris and Horus. And I kind of realized that we really are in this aeon of Horus as he describes it. So I have one quote here from the Confessions of Aleister Crowley, chapter 49. He says that in the aeon of Horus, which is the child, right, just like that child in the judgment card being born, the child is not merely a symbol of growth, but of complete moral independence and innocence. We may then expect the new aeon to release mankind from its pretense of altruism, its obsession of fear, and its consciousness of sin. So thinking about things in a moral way and the idea of something being sin or just wrong, let's just say, well, the child doesn't know right from wrong, and that will release mankind from this fear, or, fear is an attribute of Saturn, right? Restrictions and limitations. And think about what we have going on right now. It's just a bunch of children. You have to call me whatever pronoun. I get to be whatever I want. I can be, a transgender frog if I want to be. Like, it's just childish behavior. Everyone is a fucking child. And no one, there's no sense of morality or right and wrong, right? They've eliminated those two pillars. Now, granted, I do think a lot of things have gray area, but I do think that there is a good and an evil, but that's not what the occultists think. And so here we have this aeon of Horus, just a bunch of children demanding that they somehow have a right to all of these things when they haven't done any, proper work or discipline to get them. And that's just kind of how I see it.
Anything.
Yeah. And so, this as Crowley's, I don't know if that's what Aleister Crowley envisioned. People can debate on that, but, you can definitely draw the parallels. And then, these can be sourced back to biblical passages. Again, it's the interpretation, right? In Matthew 18:3, he says, "Truly I say to you, unless you become converted and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." So becoming like children in Aleister Crowley land, that probably would be how all of these sorts of esoteric occultists would view it. And then again, John 3:3, being born again, that's how you see the kingdom of God. So is the kingdom of God in their viewpoint completely devoid of restriction? And that's what I think is interesting. We're supposed to hate Saturn in the truther world. That's Saturn is so evil and bad. But Saturn just in astrological function is limitation and restriction. If you don't have any of that, what kind of world do you have? Granted, you have to have healthy ones, but, you can just see all of these things being tied together.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I'm not going to read through these, but if people want to pause it, these are all Aleister Crowley's ideas on sexual liberation. And again, there's words that sound nice, liberty, sex is sacred, people should be able to express themselves however they want. But there's a lot of dangerous stuff that's in here where it's saying that if someone interferes with somebody's sexual expression, it's an abominable crime. So again, if I want to go F a goat and somebody interferes with that, oh, dude, don't get in the way of my sexual expression, man. You could see that mindset. And this is what I don't understand about how people will look at these things when things are so broad and so vague and they don't have any definition, any Saturnian structure to them. That's how people get away with things. That's why the law is always ambiguous. That's why we have all these YouTube censorship. It's hate crime or hate speech, community guidelines. They don't actually define any of these things. And that's how they get people. They make them sound nice and righteous and liberating in these macro concepts, but there's no actual structure or actual way of laying it out,
I tell you, old Aleister was very twisted. He really was. And he's put up on a pedestal. He has become a pop culture icon. He permeates the music and the entertainment industries. And a lot of people don't know that he couldn't kick his heroin addiction. He died a heroin addict. And he was into all kinds of just sordid stuff. I'm telling you, folks, do your research.
Yeah, and the other thing is, people will say, well, oh, that's not what he meant, or that's not what, it should be meant by it. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But when things, again, are so ambiguous, to me, there's a natural tendency based on humans' messed up nature that is that going to be the logical conclusion without some sort of restriction or law or definition to it, you know?
Yeah, let me just hold on one second, Michael. Let me just pull something up here. I just want to give a reference to the. So, for anyone who's interested in reading what I believe to be a very good book about Aleister Crowley, it's called Aleister Crowley: Magic, Rock and Roll, and the Wickedest Man in the World, and it's written by Gary. I'm probably going to pronounce Gary's last name incorrectly, Lachman or Lackman. It's a great book, and actually, Gary has written a number of books that have to do with the esoteric, with mysticism and the occult. If you get a chance, I'll put this book in the description box below if you want to read. It's a very good book. He just takes it very objectively. Clearly, Gary knows a lot about the occult. Take a look at that book, and you can get some background on what Aleister Crowley was about.
Yeah, and I'm one of these people that I will defend Crowley when I think people are throwing false accusation because of what he said, because I'm trying to be objective. But when there's stuff in there that's messed up, I'm going to call it for what it is, you know? And
absolutely.
So it's no different with anything else. But, so anyways, we could finish up on the whole black and gold alchemy theme. And, you know, again, we've talked about this where it's very interesting that Donald Trump, you know, with the Trump Tower, we have basically a bunch of black cubes creating this structure. And, you know, these are the colors of, you know, Bitcoin and whatever. And then outside of Trump Tower, you have the clock, you know, like Saturn, Father Time. And then we've talked about how he's depicted as Yaldabaoth in Gnosticism, the Demiurge on the Judgment Tarot card. Again, that Judgment card that's so important to a lot of these mystery religion doctrines. You know, he's like the king tyrant holding humanity back from their esoteric oneness. And, you know, they have the magician card in a different motif where it's just producing 3D reality under the Trump presidency, where it's all about, you know, the 3D world, not higher dimensions. And so, you know, again, whatever you think about Trump, it's just that there's something going on here esoterically with him that is involved in this. And again, are we collectively able to choose the black and the gold? But we need to define what the black and the gold is. And I think that is kind of the issue here. And so I think that there's just a lot of very interesting symbolism that goes into all of this. And then the last thing, you know, again, we've tied this before, 9/11, the black and the gold, you know, the former twin pillars of duality are now this black and gold water motif going into the black cube, and they use Islam, you know, the black and gold cube to link them together. But again, we talked about this, that the occultists love to illuminate the darkness. So we see the Mac cube with the apple, the Gnosis apple, right? The Eden apple with the bite taken out, indicating, you know, the illumination Gnosis of the Gnostics. That illuminates the cube. So technology, of course, is Promethean. Promethean intellect gives technology. All of these forward-thinking revolutionary scientists are creating all this technology that we're constantly told, you know, all the problems of humanity needs to be solved by technology, 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 technology. So again, the classic allegory of Prometheus, if you want to strip out even the esoteric stuff, is it's giving technology to man. The idea of, oh, mankind discovering fire, and that created all this technology. That's just obviously tied to this. So you could see them reflecting that in, you know, Apple computers. So anyways, we'll wrap it up here and just get into the idea of that flame that illuminates the darkness that we just talked about. And I wanted to talk about it in relationship to Steemit. Now again, I'm not saying people should or shouldn't use Steemit. I'm just saying that there's interesting occult logos tied to it. So there's a lot of stuff here, but this is just all tied to this divine Hebrew letter Shin, which is the triple flame letter of God. So obviously in, you know, Hebrew religion, they use it because all of the letters have number values. This isn't an esoteric or orthodox thing. It's just part of the tradition and the system. And so I'm not saying because somebody uses this triple flame, that means they're, you know, some manipulating occultist. It's just built into the religion. And obviously there's two different ways to look at it. Probably a lot of shades in between. But anyways, you can see at the bottom left and like Crowley Golden Dawn type sigils and magic, you have that serpent gnosis surrounding the egg to be born again. And then you have that Shin flame below the serpent. I have it circled in yellow. And then you have the 7-pointed Babylon glyph at the top pointing down. So that's the idea of this Night of Pan, where you have to go into the darkness to be reborn, and Pan impregnating the great mother Babylon. It's all very strange stuff, but there's a lot of weird stuff tied to that in the JFK assassination, which, again, if people want to listen to, they can go to my Higher Side Chats talk and series on my YouTube channel. But you can see this flame thrown into a lot of different places. You could see it in the United Nations Human Rights. Now, granted, they have a triple flame next to a double one. But if you go further to the bottom right, you have the Human Rights Foundation, which is tied to Tom Lantos, who is a very interesting dude. And they have that triple flame logo. And again, if that's the Promethean intellect for philanthropy, and the UN is viewing that as part of their esoteric doctrines, and it's all tied together. And then, I don't want to go on a side tangent, but people who have studied World War II revisionism know about this Tom Lantos guy. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he was involved in the Quay incubator hoax, which is basically bringing the United States into war over a false narrative, where this girl was like, I don't know, she was the daughter of some high-ranking ambassador who told this story that most likely didn't happen. And a lot of politicians were there, and they had no idea about this. So to me, this kind of shows you that not every politician is in on something. So some of these guys were like, well, if we had known about that, that would have changed our whole perspective on it. But this guy, Tom Lantos, was like the main guy in orchestrating it all. And he's, you hear him talk. He's like, yes, you've done a great service. He's like very Mr. Burns-ish. So I don't know. It's again, people can look into World War II revisionism and Tom Lantos. This guy, Eric Hunt, does a documentary talking about this. These are questions I think people should at least look into, but look at what this is under the umbrella of human rights, the United Nations, liberating humanity, with this divine sheen flame as their logo. And so, that's the Steemit logo, essentially. The three pillars, a triple flame. You see the Santander Bank. You can see that the triple flame is built into it. Granted, that third flame is kind of hidden in the base. But that's a motif that is very much built into a lot of this stuff.
Very interesting, Michael.
Yeah, and then, again, I'm just showing examples. You can find this flame everywhere. You got it at, the Daily Plaza obelisk at the top of the 14 segments of Osiris. You have the flame. And then you had the eternal flame lit for JFK. You had the eternal flame lit for that cracked sphere on 9/11, the great spherical caryatid. We talked about that. Just this divine flame is all over the place, and it's in some very strange events. And then you can see some more motifs here where, you have a steam power occult hexagram, which is very similar to the Sephiroth and the Tree of Life, with the sheen flame at the middle, right? The solar fire active force.
Yes.
And then you can see, I just thought there's some interesting Steemit stuff, with like bots. You've used Steemit. It's all about these bots being involved, upvoting things. And think about like bots and followers. And then, you have this icon Steemit for dummies like me. Somebody's getting in line. It just, again, it's all tied to this blockchain stuff. And then Santander Bank, that triple flame logo, they became the first UK bank to introduce blockchain technology to pay through banking. So a major banking system is starting to implement international payments through blockchain. I mean, they're all getting involved in this. And you think about the idea of Steemit, the whales, right? The elites. And then you have the minnows. I mean, is that not the esoteric doctrine built right into it, just by its basic system?
Yeah.
And then the last thing, I just had some interesting numbers. I thought you have 13 ways to promote your next Steemit post. These are just articles I found. I'm not saying that the people who wrote them have some insider knowledge. I mean, these are just kind of numbers that are, kind of aesthetically pleasing sometimes because they've been so much indoctrinated into our psyche. How to use these bots effectively, how to use artificial intelligence technology effectively. And I think the most interesting one is there was a 33 top earnings post, but look at the plus sign. It's got the Sheen logo plus 33. And that Hebrew letter Sheen is given a value of 300. So if you add the 300 letter attached to that triple letter and 33, you get the number 333. Just like the cryptocurrency conference 333, That's the license plate number on JFK. It's just so many things circle back. They use the same motifs over and over and over again. It's pretty interesting. So that's all. That's pretty much everything. Yeah, I don't know if there's any final things you want to talk about or wrap up on, or summarization.
No, I mean, it's just fascinating, Michael. I'm always quiet during your presentations because I'm learning too, and I'm paying close attention to the slides. And folks, what we'll do is the slides will be in the show. And maybe, Michael, what we can do is in the description box, we can have a link to a Dropbox or something if folks want to download the files. Are you okay with that?
Sure. I'll go
okay.
on.
So maybe we could do that too, because I think it's very important to be able to stare at the slides and just to take it in. But I'm always in awe of the level of research that you do and how you pull it together. I just it's amazing.
Well, I think one final thing I'll say, just to summarize it with my own experiences, I went on Steemit and I was kind of pretty hopeful of the whole thing because I hadn't really looked at any of this stuff before that. And I'm not trying to, downplay anybody else's experience with it. But for me personally, I just didn't really like it. I felt like there was a lot of kind of sycophantic behavior that you can see built into it. Not because people are being disingenuous, but because of the system itself. I think it just kind of breeds that a bit. You go upvote people and then you have some power and you think, well, maybe they'll come and check out my stuff. And you just play these little games that I just don't want to play and I get really sick of. And you have like people posting stuff on your post that you obviously didn't read your post. But they're, oh, great job. And you go to their channel and like, they're just spamming all of this, like in the Matrix stuff, and I'm like, well, maybe they could be looking at esoteric or New World Order stuff and they don't want to be out in the open of it, or they're just trying to, reach a bunch of people to try to get them over to their side of things. And, there is kind of like this larger, I guess maybe you would call it libertarian, presence there. And the one thing that I think more about the idea of that, I'm not saying that being a libertarian, there's something wrong with it or anything like that, but just the general mindset. If you think about, freedom and you can do whatever you want, we want complete freedom of the individual. But I revert back to that Crowley philosophy. Like, you really need to have some definitions of some things, because otherwise, when there's ambiguity about freedom, I just think that something's always going to take advantage of that and bring it to this destructive state, and I wonder if that the libertarian parts that are healthy and that are involved in trying to fight the New World Order, this might be an example of, them using their enemies to their advantage. And it's just interesting that, in Freemasonry, if you read about it, they hate monarchy and they hate government. But this is in context of the old world. And so my question is, have they infiltrated the old world institutions and they've revamped it where they're in control, but they have a different way of looking at it? And I'm just wondering, is their way of looking at it actually creating things way worse than, quote unquote, more traditional view of things? But maybe there's some way we can kind of bridge the gap of still being, progressive, up to date and modern and not completely, being a Luddite, but still retaining a certain amount of healthy restriction and value that we can bring back from tradition and our ancestors, the parts that are good, the things that we've been warned against. And, I just, I wonder about that with a lot of this stuff, because for me, when you're in this kind of like free market anarcho-capitalism, kind of like there's a lot of people that are just kind of obsessed with cryptocurrency. And to me, you're kind of just worshiping the Greek god Mercury. You're just worshiping the market. And I just wonder if that's sort of this false idol that, trying to create a better system of finance and something that's more based on merit, that's a good thing. I like a lot of like what Ayn Rand writes about, but there's still something lacking there to me. And, I just wonder if that aspect is being used for an alternate agenda, and some people might want to just rethink some of where they're going with some of the stuff, and just based on their experience. Based on my experience with Steemit, I think that a general mindset, a general buzz or trend, that's the herd of something. It might be on a smaller scale, but it moves in a general direction. And I just think that in my personal experience with Steemit, I didn't really like where that general buzz was going. Other people might, and that's fine. But I just stopped using it. And the other thing that really concerns me is the idea of it just being tied to that blockchain forever. Whereas, if I can't edit anything on Steemit, if I can't ever edit any of my posts, what happens if something cracks down and tries to find you? And now all of a sudden I posted some comment on World War II revisionism, and I'm going to get severely punished in the online system world because of something that maybe was written 5-6 years ago. I don't know. So my thing, just my personal thing, is I'm withdrawing from it. I'm not using any of this crypto stuff or blockchain stuff anymore until I get to see it develop a little bit. That's just my personal take, but people, I encourage them to do what they think is right. And that's what I'll just finish up on.
No, that's very good points, Michael. And the only thing I use with Steemit is DTube. That's all I do. I guess my DTube uploads of my shows wind up on my Steemit blog by default. But you made a good point about not being able to delete something. As an example, I had a show that went up, and for some reason, it went up twice. So I said, well, I don't need to have this show up on DTube twice, so let me go out and delete one of the shows. And when I went to go do that, I couldn't do it. And I did a search, and there was an explanation as to how to do it. But evidently, once somebody watches or rates the video, whatever it may be, you can't delete it anymore. I mean, and folks, if I'm wrong, please write me. My email is down in the description box. But I could not find a way to delete it. And so I'm with you, Michael. This thing where it's out there forevermore. I don't know if I want my stuff out there forevermore. Let's put it this way. I don't mind it being out there forevermore as long as I have control over it. And if I wish at some point to take something down, to delete it, that I can do that. The fact that that's being taken away from me, that's
and I wonder if that YouTube censorship purge was kind of like a catalyst for this preemptively to try to put people in blockchain technology. I'm not sure, just something I think about. But the other thing is, I've noticed that people aren't really complaining as much about YouTube censorship anymore. I mean, I know it happens.
I was just going to say that.
But, it was kind of like this panic, right? Like the God Pan. Everything's based off of panic, and then it leads you, problem, reaction, solution. So that's why I'm kind of withdrawing from it. I want to give it more time. And I also think that in some way, I mean, I've kind of talked about this a little bit, that people in this alternative media world, we're kind of in our own esoteric society, whether we like it or not. If you talk to somebody in the regular world and you don't know if they're into any of this stuff, there might be certain things they might say that might clue you in, kind of like, a Mason sees another all-seeing eye and they're like, oh, and they might try to shake their hand a certain way. So we kind of have that, whether, again, we like it or not. And so I think that this idea of trying to help support people with subscription services where part of it is off of line for people who are paid subscribers, because that will allow people to put stuff out to the public that you don't have to put the super sensitive stuff in. And that way, when you have discussions in forums within different constructs, I think of like the higher side chats. If you go subscribe to Greg, you're talking with other people within their forum. And I think the conversations can be a lot more productive. You don't have people coming in and trolling and derailing things. And so you kind of have to live in both worlds. But again, you're going to have to support people because those things can't happen for free. And I think that most people with subscriber services, another one I like just because I've been getting into it more, is Jay Dyer has one. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he does a lot of stuff on all of these globalist viewpoints, reading from their own books. I come at from the esoteric viewpoint. He just reads like Bertrand Russell and, all of these globalists. Yeah,
I post a lot of Jay's stuff on.
Yeah, and I have a subscription to him, and I'm not like being a pimp for it or something like that. But, it's just sort of like it's like $5 a month, and there's just so much great stuff in the extended content. So I think that that's a good model. Like him and Greg and people like that when people are doing that, I think it's important to try to support them, because I think that that's really, you need to keep some of that stuff hidden, because if you're going to have this crackdown on these platforms that we're given that are the big heavy hitters that they have more control over. Of course they have control over a lot of the internet, but it's going to be harder to them to get to these private subscriber things than it will be when you have Facebook or YouTube or even something maybe like Steam. Maybe they're trying to evolve us into another social media that they might have control over. I don't really know, but it's something to think about. And also, I think like the SEMA thing, what ties you to it a lot? You think, oh, I can earn money. I can earn crypto. Is that using something to your advantage? Even though I get it, like I think earning money for your stuff is not a problem. There's nothing wrong with it. I was just espousing it. But is that context? It's kind of like free money. I don't know. I had to think of it from that standpoint. And for me, I personally just said, hey, you know what? I need to withdraw from certain aspects of it. I have no problem if other people do, but going into this research, this is really what kind of pushed me into thinking what I want to step back from all this stuff. So whatever anyone's decision is, it's fine. And I hope that I'm wrong about it all. I'll say that.
I will say this though, to the degree, folks, that you can support researchers where you enjoy their work and you're learning through contributions or donations, Patreon as an example, you should do that because there's a lot of work that goes in behind this research. And, you're paying for your cable bill, you're paying for Netflix, you're paying for Hulu, you're paying for whatever it is that, Amazon Prime and so on. So I think that, if you have your handful of alternative researchers that are doing work and presenting very good material, Michael has excellent material, that you should look to make a donation and a contribution once in a while. I'm going to go out and say that, Michael, because, it's like I speak to a lot of people that are in the business and, they're doing this on their own nickel. It's very time consuming. It would be helpful if every once in a while somebody threw them a couple of coins, that's just my view. Some people might not agree with that, but that's how I
and unfortunately we're tied to the monetary system. We can't get around that. And we have to live in it. So, let's do what the frickin' occultists say they do. Use our enemies to our advantage. We could just flip all these doctrines when you see them used in a certain way. Most of the time you could just kind of reverse it, and it's fine. It's the details that matter.
All right, my friend. Well, you did obviously another excellent job. You know this. I don't even have to say it, but come back anytime, Michael, and talk about whatever it is you want to talk about. And, send me the slides and I'll make sure I put them into the slideshow when I do the video. And that'll do it. I'll try to have the show up as soon as I can.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mike. And it's always happy to be here.
And that concludes another Sage of Quay interview. And I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.
Hey there, brother, take a look around. Does it bother you that the world is upside down? Can't you see? You're not free. Hey there, sister, look out your door. Does it bother you when your child goes to war? Can't you see? You're not free. Hey there, neighbor, look to the sky. Does it bother you that your life is a lie? Can't you see? You're not free. I know you can be if you try. in the rain. Does it bother you that you never took the blame? Can't you see? You're not free. Hey there, mother, time is passing by. Does it bother you if a child doesn't fly? Can't you see? You're not free. Hey there, stranger, have you lost your soul? Does it bother you when you don't even know? Can't you see? You're not free. I know you can be if you try. I know you can